What up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at one of these videos here. Pokemon investing isn't as safe as you think. So I watched it. Phillips Collectibles, good Pokemon YouTuber, has probably one of the highest production quality editing skills that there is in the game. No hate on him, and I'm not even saying he's wrong, but I just wanted to cover some of the stuff he talks about in this video because I do think it's not the full story, right? So I do want to just add my thoughts on this because I definitely did have thoughts, and although he has a point, and we'll talk about it, there's nuance here which I don't think is captured in this video. So we're gonna talk about that here. Let's take a look.
Now, one thing that's concerning is the amount of people convinced that Pokemon cards will continue to climb indefinitely. And I think a lot of people...
Now, if that is true, that people think it'll climb indefinitely, which I don't know if people are that crazy, but if you think it's going to just go up and not fall in at some point, and it's just a straight line up or, a diagonal line up, yeah, obviously that's not going to happen. No investment works like that. Houses, Pokemon, Bitcoin, the stock market, anything goes up and down, right? Nothing goes indefinitely up. But if you take a long-term view, then we could make different arguments, right? We could take the stock market and say the S&P 500 has gone up in the long term, but there will be short-term crashes, right? We'll take a look at that later. But yeah, might as well take a look at it now here. So guys, look, all this time, this was a crash, right? Now it looks like nothing. This was a crash. These were crashes. This was a crash. This was a crash, right? This was a crash. Now, if you bought at 306, you'd be feeling pretty horrible at this point, right? But if you held it, doesn't look so bad, right? So that's the thing we got to keep in mind. Bitcoin is the exact same way, right? Like you'd feel awful if you bought this here and in a little bit you'd feel pretty bad. But if you bought this and held up till today, you're feeling freaking awesome, right? So I think it all depends on context. Nothing goes up forever. Like for example, it's not just up, 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 up. There will be crashes, but you're going up again. So right off the bat, I hope no one thinks that things just go up forever and don't have crashes at some point.
Have a rude awakening. Though before we get into today's video, I am gifting this Yveltal illustration rare from Paradox Rift to one subscriber. Now, if I reply to your comment and I add the luck...
By the way, guys, I will have his video linked in the description. Check it out. You could even win cool prizes. He gives one away every video, I feel like. So definitely check out the channel.
Now, I think confidence is high, but like a lot of things in life, some things cannot last forever. Now, the obvious thing that's coming up now, this bull run, this Pokemon cards are climbing, Pokemon cards are never going to go down in value. We've seen it before, a lot of us who've been in this hobby. If you were around during the 2021 to around the 2022 period, okay? It was the same story. Everyone collectively thought that these cards would just continue climbing indefinitely, okay? But there is a pullback, which is quite natural when things are this overheated. So, I think it's a good thing to get yourself involved in this hobby, learn a little bit about the aspects of it, learn about what's actually happening, what's changing within the hobby, so you can actually get your knowledge up to date with what's happening. Because
that's completely fair point right there. Obviously, don't just buy things willy-nilly. Actually spend some time in the hobby, see what happens. Look at stuff like price charting, like TCG Player. I prefer price charting for longer term tracking, right? Because I think TCG Player just has 1 year graphs. So price charting will show you the history of these cards, and you can start to get to know what's possible. We'll look at some examples in this one, but definitely, yeah, don't just rush in. If you're brand new to Pokemon, don't just purchase a random Grail card worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. We'll talk about that, but a good point there.
Yes, it is very interesting. Obviously, when you see a Moonbreon selling for the absurd prices and it's like literally doubled in a few days, it's getting exciting. A lot of people who bought their collections previously are really happy with that. A lot of people who invested in Sword and Shield booster boxes are getting.
Yeah, so I'm one of those people. If you guys didn't know, in the last 2 months, a portfolio that I have that I didn't add to went from 100,000 to 150,000. I made a video about it recently. So that's 50% growth in 2 months. Yeah, so we are experiencing some insane growth right now, and it would be normal to have a pullback at some point. We just don't know exactly when it's going to be or how big it's going to be.
Playoffs right now. A lot of people who, myself included, bought a little bit of Sword and Shield booster boxes. Right now, I'm seeing some gains on that, and I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. And then don't forget, a lot of people who've also invested in collectibles are getting more and more bullish right now because they're like, oh, see, my decisions that I made before are paying off so much right now. Now, yes, it's good. Yes, it's great. But the reason why I want to talk to you right now, especially if you're buying singles, is I want to give you some actual examples of what's happened before in bull runs, right? So we've had
So here's an example of something he just said. So he's mostly talking about singles here, and that's what his examples are. It says Pokemon investing isn't as safe as you think, and booster boxes can obviously go down as well in price in the short term, but historically, long term, booster boxes have gone up. Just like I showed you with the stock market, just like I showed you with Bitcoin. Yes, you'll have crashes, and honestly, with sealed product, it's usually less pronounced than some of those dips we've seen in the stock market and in Bitcoin. But long term, if you hold, it's going to go up. Everything that came out so far has gone up long term if you just give it enough time. Now, if you're worried about investing in singles and losing money, that is an option that doesn't really address in great detail, but you can invest in sealed product, right? In booster boxes.
a few examples of bull runs. Now the 2020 to 2021 boom or bull run wasn't so much focused that heavily on modern. It was focused very heavily on vintage Pokemon cards. So, everything about Charizard base set and everything from the 1999 base set packs, those cards were the ones in the spotlight. Now, they were pretty much what everyone was speaking about, right? But believe it or not, they did have quite a big pullback. And I want to walk you through that because right now we're in this bull run. It's almost chaos, right? Everyone's just like, I'm going to buy. But this is where we want to take ourselves out of that situation and show that, it's not a risk-free thing. There is always risks when you're buying cards for such high values. So here I'm on.
And I'd further say that there's always risk in any form of investing, right? Obviously, when you're not buying at the low, you could say there's added risk, but at the end of the day, there's always going to be risk investing. You could buy something that hasn't shot off, right? A non-popular Pokemon, for example, and at the end of the day, it might never take off, right? So, and that card that did take off 10 years from now could be worth multiples of what it is today. So that's some context. Obviously, you never know. Nothing is risk-free. No investment.
On the Lugia PSA 10.
By the way, this is very interesting stuff. I'm glad he pointed this stuff out.
First edition. Now you can see that this graph here that I'm on is actually from PSA's official website, and this actually tracks PSA 10 sold prices from eBay and it puts it on their website. It's actually a really good tool. I want to take you through here. So you can see in February 4th, 2017, right? The Lugia PSA 10 first edition sold for 635 USD. That it sold for 1,000 USD. Right here sold for 1,000. Again, another sale for 1,000. It was quite a consistent price point that this was selling for. It had its price in the market, and that was like that for a very long time. Even in 2018, it sold for 1,462. Yes, it went up a little bit in value, but the price point was established, right? It did have this price point of around, somewhere between 800 USD to 1.5K. That was where the Lugia PSA 10 was sitting. When the bull run happened, you can see in that 2020 to 2021 period, next sale was 12,592, and then you can see the sale price was $129,000. This was in November.
Now, just to make things clear and full transparency, I don't really invest in any vintage stuff. And one of the reasons why is because they went through this huge boom, right? I think a lot of us investors are focusing on the newer stuff. Let's say, I know some people are focusing on X and Y, Sun and Moon. Mainly for me, I've been focusing on Sword and Shield, and as well as Scarlet and Violet. Now, those haven't had those hundreds of thousands of dollars moves. So I think that would be a good place to focus on for investing. Because, yes, if something had this run up, right, up to all the way up to 129,000, and now even it's still way higher than it used to be, obviously that's a different story than stuff that hasn't had those big run ups, which is why I focus on modern, and I wouldn't go back and invest in vintage and expect it to go up, right? We'll see when he talks a bit more about modern, but I think the examples of modern are limited in this video.
November of 2020 when this whole vintage boom was happening. But then check out the pullback, right? Now the most recently sold price was 47,000. Still a huge increase. But if you bought this at 129,000 when the bull run was happening.
So if you bought this at 129,000, obviously some people have money to spend for sure, but you could create simple rules for yourself. One of my rules is with single cards, especially, I'm trying not to spend significantly more than 1,000 USD for a card, right? So even if something is at 10,000, I personally view it as missing the boat. Yeah, if it could go up, that's cool, but 10,000 is such a big investment where I feel like there's so many opportunities that are below 1,000 USD that I personally would just avoid hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of a single card, right? I think that's an easy way to avoid some of these mistakes.
Kind of with what's happening right now, you can see the pull.
Now, to be 100% real with you guys, that Lugia could have another run. And the people that bought it for 127,000, if they kept it, which is just asking a lot, they could end up at 200,000 at some point. But it's just such a big risk with that amount of money and with that amount of already experienced growth that to me, it just isn't worth the risk reward ratio.
Pullback could be tremendous. Now, it wasn't just Lugia. A lot of vintage cards had this, right? You can see another great example is the Venusaur PSA 10 first edition. Before the bull run of 2020, right? Let's look at 2019. You can see this was selling for 2.9K. Now, what's really interesting is check out this bull run. Made one sale of $50,000, went back down and found its feet around this 22,000 range, 21,000. Made another sale in April of 2021 for $60,000. And now when we look at the most recently sold price,
that's also so strange to me, the lack of consistency. Like, is this an inside job here? Someone having a lot of them and trying to pump it up? Because there could be people that are so rich they just buy it and they don't even look at last solds. But bro, if you're seeing these last solds and you jump up to here, what? And then even these guys, and it's going down and you jump up to, and then it's even lower and then goes back up. That's so weird to me. So I feel like if you see something like this, one sale, not repeated sales, I would not believe those are real sales personally.
Which was just a few months ago, it sold for $12,600. Check that out. If you bought in the bull run, you bought it for $60,000, and now it's selling for $12,600. This is where it's very interesting, and this is where.
And I think he said it's from PSA, so like I do trust PSA, so I don't know exactly what's happening there, but the buyers must have not been well informed. That's all I can just assume it's like ignorance on the buyer's part, because that's just crazy to have such discrepancy with what people are willing to pay. And again, it might be someone with millions upon millions, billions of dollars, and then who cares for them? Like it's like buying a coffee, right?
Where everyone can get into this kind of whirlwind of, oh, it's going to climb indefinitely. But, is it likely that vintage cards, there will be probably another vintage boom, longer, maybe when the 30th anniversary of Pokemon comes about, maybe those previously sold prices will be exceeded. But, if you're buying at the top of the market, or if you're buying during these bull runs, you can get burnt, okay?
Okay, so he did admit that it could go higher. And if you're buying at the top of these bull runs, again, you never know where the top is 100%. Right, so that's the other thing. Like, you're not at the bottom right now, because clearly we've gone up, but you don't know where the top is. So it's easy to say don't buy at the top, but you don't know where the top is. And like he himself acknowledged, even if you buy at the top, he says you can get burned. Yeah, if you sell, right? But potentially, if you're buying the right stuff, it will go up if you're just willing to hold it. Now, when you're going to get burned, and I talk about this in my investing video, if you guys want to check that out on the channel, I'll leave it in the description. But there are easy ways to put yourself in a position where you don't get burned. One is to not use leverage, not use credit card debt ever with investments. And in that situation, you could just hold. You don't need the money, right? You spend money that you wouldn't need for 5 to 10 years, which is what any investment should minimum amount that should be held is 5 to 10 years if you're really treating it as an investment, right? So in that sense, yeah, I don't really think that you'll necessarily get burned if you do things right. But again, I minimize my risk too, more than some people. I would not pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for a Pokemon card.
It's not just this, oh, I'm going to buy this PSA 10 Rayquaza right now. I'm going to buy this PSA 10 Lugia right now. Like, you know.
Now, PSA 10 Rayquaza, or Lugia right now, if he's talking about the alt arts, I don't think those are hit the ceiling. Now, they can go down, right, in the short term. But I personally, if you ask me, I think 5, 10 years from now, both the Rayquaza and the Lugia will be higher than they are now, right? It's just a question of if you take that gamble, if you buy it, do you have time to wait if it goes down, or do you need the money right now? In which case, don't buy it, obviously. Don't put money into investments that you need in the short term.
You know, the modern cards, right? You can get burnt. And the problem is, and something that has to be said, yes, more fans are entering the hobby. But don't forget, these vintage cards have very, very low population. When you look at modern cards, populations are much higher than these as well, okay? So it's even...
So another thing here is the assuming how important pop reports are. If you look at some of these high pop reports, with like the Moonbryon, for example, I think it's around 15,000 for PSA 10s. If you pay attention to that and you pay attention to how many people would want that in their collection, and assuming that the Pokemon hobby could grow, and there's also inflation to think about, right? The purchasing power of your dollar is getting weaker and weaker every year. It's very, it's obviously clear that there are more than 15,000 hardcore fans of Pokemon. And don't you think that there are at least 15,000 people who have the funds and who really want that Umbreon VMAX in their collection, right? Especially since it's the top card of Sword and Shield, considered by some to be the best era of Pokemon ever. I feel like, yeah, you got to put that in perspective. A lot of people, we haven't seen what the Umbreon VMAX is capable of. All we've seen is up to like $3,000 now or something. Well, these other cards have gone tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. So yes, he's saying that these, for example, first edition Venusaur has less PSA 10s. Sure, but also the price of the Umbreon hasn't gone to $20,000, right? So that's also a different thing. Plus, it's completely possible, and I think it's true, that more people want the Umbreon at that price than people who want the Venusaur at the Venusaur's current price.
Even a bit more riskier with modern cards, because even though this sold for $60,000 or it's selling for $12,000, there is actually far less population of these PSA 10 Venusaurs, or the PSA 10 Bubble Mew that's selling right now that's getting really high prices. So this has to be considered when you're purchasing these things, okay? Another one is the Blastoise PSA 10 first edition.
There's also modern stuff that has doesn't have a lot of pop report, and Scarlet and Violet era is really good for that. If you check out the Magikarp from Paldea Evolved, that has less than 2,000. The Meryl, I think, also has 102, like the Venusaur for now. That will go up, obviously. But there won't necessarily be tens of thousands of PSA 10 versions of every chase card in Scarlet and Violet. a lot won't reach the 10,000 mark because of bad print quality. So we are going to have, in most likely with a lot of Scarlet and Violet cards, less of a population than we did with Sword and Shield. So that's something to consider as well.
Really interesting, right? Before the boom, selling for 5.9k, 4.5k, 4.8k. During the boom, the top sale price was $80,000, had a massive pullback to around $27,000, and right now, last sold price was in 2023 for $23,000. It would probably sell for around that price point again if sold today. But, we're in a boom right now, but you can see that that's a dramatic pullback. If you bought at the top of the market, which was $80,000, which is when this crazy hype kind of built up, you can also see that you got burnt quite heavily. Now, this is what we have to consider. There is going to be pullbacks, and they do happen within this hobby. People thought vintage cards would climb indefinitely. People just thought, oh, the PSA 10 Charizard's going to be $1 million card. Oh, all these cards are going to go to $1 million. Well,
like I said, anybody thinking that any investment will climb indefinitely and not have crashes at some point is being unrealistic, right?
Once it starts tapering back, it does drop quicker than expected, okay? Another one is the Nidoking PSA 10, another really interesting example, right? The first edition. You can see during 2019, selling for 1.3k, 2.5k. Modern was cool, but vintage was the thing that's hot. What a pullback. Right now, modern is cool, but what's going to happen when more and more sets get released, more and more cards come out?
So he didn't address the fact that he's saying modern is pretty much in the position that vintage was during the boom. But I feel like he's not addressing the fact that these vintage cards or these modern cards are way less expensive than those vintage cards were. So I feel like that is a factor you should consider when thinking about if something is a good investment, right? Is it already at $100,000? Is it at $20,000? Or is it at less than $1,000 or $2,000, right? All of this is, in my opinion, important to consider when you're making a play.
Are these prices just going to maintain? Don't forget, we're in the hype period. Once it pulls back, very, very likely that it can come down in value. Now, yes, some of the
100%. We are in a hype period right now. I agree with that. There's no other way to explain me making 50% on my Pokemon portfolio in 2 months. Like, that's absolutely insane. And I don't expect it to continue at that rate for sure. It's just hard to time bottoms or tops for that matter. So I'm personally investing where I see deals. I'm going to invest when the market falls. I'm going to invest as it's going up because it's hard to time the exact bottom or top of a market.
In 2023. So before all this happened, we did have, Japanese female trainer cards also go. There was this...
Okay, you guys, look at my video. Warning, do not invest in Japanese Pokemon products. And again, I say invest. Open it up. Have fun with it. Spend money on it. That's all good. But in my opinion, it's not fair to compare English investing with Japanese investing. And we're going to finish with that video. But first, I want to show you guys. So, more modern examples, right? Latias and Latios GX came out in 2019, I believe, right? So about 6 years ago. Now look at this. It's been going up in PSA 10, which is what he was showing for the vintage stuff. Hit 2,600, right? Fell. Was hype period in 2023. And so if you bought at the top, which is unlikely, right? Like, wow, would you be that one guy that bought at the top? But let's say you were that one guy that bought at the top. You held for how long? Not even 2 years. You would have... Now, this is saying 3,850. It's not updated, though. Latest sales, 5,100, 4,312. So if you were that one guy that by far paid the most for it during a hype period, you would be almost doubled your money by now in less than 2 years, right? That's about 50% per each year that you earned. So that's a counter argument to this, right? He's showing a lot of cards going down or that haven't recovered yet, or they might at some point, right? Especially with the vintage stuff if there are another periods of booms. But he hasn't been showing that if you focus on modern like I do, and you look at these GX cards in PSA 10, they're looking really good, right? And this isn't the only example, obviously. We have Gengar and Mimikyu, right? Also making new highs. If you were the one who bought the worst time, 1,100, you're looking at 1,450 recent sales, almost 1,500. So you'd be up on your money there too. Obviously, a more modern example, and I mostly invested in Sword and Shield and now Scarlet and Violet. So I didn't benefit from the Sun and Moon stuff. I'm just showing that a lot of people did. See, at this point, you could have been upset because you bought the top 1,300. But look at latest sales. Over 3,000 you have. So if you bought at these high periods, yeah, it may feel bad, but if you just hold, like how long ago was this? 2 to 3 years ago. Big deal. You know, if you hold 2 to 3 years, you're up not quite 3x, but way more than double on your investment. So I think, you know, you got to put this in perspective. There are more examples, but let's continue with the video for now.
Crazy momentum for them. Everyone was buying him, right? Now, what happened, and these crashed very much in value, is because a lot of people jumped in on the hype train. But the problem is, Japanese female trainer cards are very much a collectible for Japanese audiences. Now, what happened was because this hype and momentum built, every single region started jumping on these Japanese female trainer cards, right? Now, yes, they were selling for high prices, but the pullback was enormous. Look at the pullback here. You can see this is the Clay Burst Iono, right? You can see this was selling in...
Again, my honest advice, guys, don't invest in Japanese. I know some people will disagree with me, but I don't think Japanese is the same as investing in English. So I avoid it. Made videos about that before.
During the high period of the, that 2023, it was around early to mid 2023. Sold for this range here. You can see how strong that market was. Selling, the top of the market was around 660. Then it, found its feet at around 520 and had consistent sale prices from around $500 to $550. Pocket. There's a lot of things happening, okay? But when some of the people who are coming in, like maybe some hype beasts are coming in, maybe some people who just want to get in on the fun, when that kind of calms down, you can expect some price drops. And this is why I just want to let everyone know, it's not just this risk-free purchase that I'm going to be buying an Umbreon right now for
Guys, please tell me that you know that none of these, just like every other investment, nothing is risk-free. There can always be drops. Like, come on. Please tell me you guys don't think. Please tell me there's not someone out there who thinks there's going to be no drops and it's all upside. That's just crazy to me if there are actually people that think like that.
$3,000, and that's going to maybe maintain that price point. Maybe when things calm down and the dust settles, it might start tapering down and it can't maintain those price points. This is very important information for people who are new to collectibles to know that it's not just this risk-free purchase. Right now it looks like that. Right now it looks like whatever you do, you're not going to get burned, but there is chances that that can happen. I think right now...
What I like about this video is, yes, let's give people some pause that they're not FOMOing, and give some examples of times that people could have gotten burnt. Right? For sure. That's useful information that some people have to hear to kind of, hold off the immediate willingness, if there are people like that, to spend tens of thousands of dollars on Pokemon cards for like one card, for example. That's definitely useful information, but I hope I showed that there are counter examples, right? It's not that black and white. There's nuance. And I'll go here on a previous video of his, right? This was over 7 months ago. Now, he was talking about not buying alt arts at that point. So here we have the Blaziken VMAX, and that one still hasn't recovered. Yeah, so that one still hasn't recovered to those highs. But in some examples, like with the Umbreon, right, this was looking expensive, and this is not even at what it was at the time, but he was kind of showing right before it fell. But even if you got that top 957, right, now you're looking at 1,450, all right, some 1,269, 1,458, right? That's up even if you bought at that point. If you bought the Gengar, 408, right? Looked expensive. Now you're looking at recent solds of 600. Some one even 800. And then, yeah, so the thing continues. There was, I believe, Espeon here, an example of an Espeon in PSA 10.
Okay, guys, so the Sword and Shield boom that is currently happening right now in the market.
Right, so the high here was 430. If we go to Espeon right now, you're looking at 686, right? So these were highs, and for the Blaziken, he was right. It didn't recover. But even if you bought some of these at the highs where he was not buying, if you bought and you held for what, 7-8 months, you'd already be significantly up on a lot of these cards. So it's important to keep in mind things can always drop, but are you always scared to buy in? That's the question. Are you always going to be worried about buying in? And in that case, you're just holding cash that's losing purchasing power every year, and you're not investing into assets. Now, it doesn't have to be Pokemon, obviously, it could be different investments. But I just feel like, keep in mind, yes, markets can always go down, but if you believe in an investment, it doesn't have to be Pokemon, it can be Bitcoin, can be the stock market, can be real estate. Don't be constantly worried that, yeah, it'll fall, because you can buy something and then it falls, but just hold it until it goes up higher if you believe in what you purchased. If people are constantly worried about that things will fall, you'll never get into the market. And the people that get into the market, even at the all-time high, as I showed you with some of these cards, like, look, this guy bought in at the top and yet pretty much doubled his money if you look at recent sales. Whereas the people who are like, oh, I'm too worried to buy in, made zero money, right? This person doubled their money. So it's just something to think about, some nuance. Nothing against what he's saying here. It's important to keep in mind markets can crash, markets can go down. But if you do it the way I focus on it, I think you're a lot safer if you focus on modern stuff, if you don't buy cards worth tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you invest in the newer stuff, that's 1,000 USD or less, I think there's a lot of room for growth and there's a lot less risk than these kinds of videos would imply. But that's it for this one. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoy Pokemon investing, and I'll see you in the next one.